Now for today's program. Jonathan Gruber crafts storytelling journeys that reveal honesty and vulnerability. The force behind Black Eye Productions, Jonathan has spent more than 25 years directing, writing, and producing acclaimed documentary films. His work celebrates unsung heroes, educates audiences, builds brands, fuels social movements, and captivates viewers. He co created and executive produced the MSNBC series The Story of Cool. Jonathan's latest documentary is Senator Joe Lieberman. Matthew Lieberman, a former teacher and the son of Joe Lieberman, served as a senior advisor and national surrogate on the Gore Lieberman campaign in 2000 and played a similar role in the 2003-2004 Lieberman for President campaign. In 2020, Matt was a Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate from Georgia. Matt is a past president of the Jewish National Fund for the Southeast and a strong supporter of Israel and Jewish causes. Matt writes a regular email newsletter with tens of thousands of readers on the Substack platform, The Lieberman Files. Joining Jonathan and Matt today is Moment Senior Editor Dan Freedman. Dan has had a distinguished career in journalism, working for newspapers like the Philadelphia Bulletin, before coming to Washington, D.C. to work in the Washington Bureau of Hearst Newspapers. Dan has won several journalism prizes, including the David Lynch Regional Reporting Award. Please welcome Jonathan Gruber, Matthew Lieberman, and Dan Freedman.
Thank you, Suzanne, and welcome, Jonathan and Matt, and good to be here with you. Such an interesting documentary that you've made. There's just so much to it, and we'll get into some of that, hopefully without spoiling the content, much of which is unusual, unique, I would say. So without further ado, Jonathan, talk to us a little bit about the genesis of the film, how it came to your mind that this is a worthwhile subject. I mean, you've made other documentaries. Menachem Begin comes to mind, and why Joe Lieberman of all people?
Well, thanks Dan and to Moment for having me on and talking about this timely film. Joe Lieberman was interviewed in the Upheaval. Upheaval was the Menachem Begin film. His former chief of staff, Rob Schwartz, was the executive producer of that film. He was his chief of staff, and he was state majority leader in Connecticut. And there was a story that went around in 2021 about the Secret Service and sort of what they do. And someone sent out another email based on that article going out, saying that it reminded him of what it was like when he was interacting with the Secret Service when they were protecting Joe and Hadassah, and that Joe and Hadassah were always making sure, are they well fed? Is the Secret Service taken care of? It was kind of a symbiotic relationship, which is kind of unusual. And something just clicked, and I thought that's a great story within a bigger story, which is someone who was civil, who could disagree without being disagreeable, who wasn't always just towing the party line. Just a lot of really chewy and juicy things, all within the framework of the last 40 or 50 years of American history. And so I spoke to Rob and said, can you reach out to Joe and Hadassah? And they were first very humble about it. Why should we do a film, about us? And we suggested that it was important for a lot of reasons, being civil and working with the other side, but also creating a curriculum to help with kind of the lost art of civics in this country. And so that's how it started in 2021. We started production in 2023, and we're almost done. Showed the clip to Joe in March of 2024, and he wrote back and said, I think it's great. Even though he had said, I know it's not going to be all hugs and kisses. I think that's also something very unusual about Joe, is his ability to look at his decisions and defend them, but also talk about them and not just lay blame elsewhere or only take credit. And he said, it's a great legacy for my public service. And then 6 days later, he passed away. So he did get to see the majority of the film. And That was kind of a long answer for your short question.
No. Very good. Thank you. Matt, can you just elaborate a little bit on that answer and take us inside the Lieberman family and the kind of deliberations, pro and con, do it or not do it? And I'm mindful of something, I hope I'm not giving too much away, but in the documentary, the point made elsewhere and almost historically about Jews not wanting to publicize themselves or step into important roles or anything because that would evoke or provoke anti-Semitism. It's just kind of, you don't want to be too public out there if you're Jewish. But I'm not sure that did that at least play a role in the pluses and minuses deliberation.
Well, no, that didn't at all. And to be honest, it was really just my dad and Hadassah who deliberated. And just first, that I don't think that would have ever even crossed his mind, that the sort of to lay low on the Jewishness, because his experience as a Jewish American was such that he kind of maxed out his Jewishness and he maxed out his Americanness, and he saw them as symbiotic, not as in opposition to each other. So I'm positive that wasn't it. I mean, to be honest, at some point, I think my dad became wary of people wanting to do things that might ordinarily seem to be nice or honors or whatever, because he came to feel that sometimes they were primarily for the interest of whoever was asking, not because they wanted to do, like they wanted to raise money for their organization or something like this. Obviously, the documentary is a different beast from that kind of situation, but he was very humble, and I think he it's the kind of thing, he had a sense of history very much. He was a student of history, as Jonathan said, and as I talked to my dad about it as well, he saw this as an important part of his legacy, something, and he wasn't planning on dying on March 27th, but he saw it as something that would live on beyond him and hopefully inspire people, and understand his career, good, bad, and otherwise. So he was absolutely thrilled to know this was happening, and he was happy that he had gotten to see the almost final cut of it as well.
Thank you, Matt. Again, Matt, can you tell us what it was like growing up as the son of Senator Joseph Lieberman?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody, hey, he's my dad. I don't think of him as being anything other than my dad. But I mean, at some point, you were almost 20, 21, something like that, when he was elected to the Senate. And of course, he'd had a distinguished career in Connecticut before that. But just what was it like, just to return to the original question, growing up in the household of Joseph I. Lieberman?
Yeah. Well, he was a great dad. She's just, what you see is what you got. I mean, what I would always tell people when I was campaigning, he's exactly the person that you see. If you meet him, that's what he'll be like. The person you see on TV, that sense of him. And as a dad, he was just as, genuine and warm and approachable as could be. He did become, known, I suppose, for moral rectitude. Fortunately, I've never had too strong of an impulse to act in immoral ways, so that I wasn't that worried about. I didn't feel like it cramped my style in any meaningful way at all. But it was great. Look, although it was certainly nothing like what he would become, he was in the Connecticut State Senate from the time I was 3. And many of my earliest memories are campaigning with him just around New Haven, just very vivid memories going door to door with him, campaigning on Sunday mornings outside the supermarket, putting leaflets in people's grocery bags, stuff like that. And he always seemed very important to me. He always seemed, in addition to being my dad, which made him important, he was important because people wanted to talk to him. And you could tell even before I could probably intellectualize it, you could tell that people respected him and listened to him. And then it got bigger and bigger. You know, he became the Attorney General of Connecticut, and then he was elected to the U.S. Senate when I was a senior in college, and that was an entirely different level. And so again, it really, it was wonderful growing up in a home, and then even when I was out of the house as an adult, feeling that connected to what was going on in the world. I think that was a real gift. And you know, he was inclusive in that way, and willing and interested in talking to us and hearing what we had to say. That was wonderful, to feel like not only you were connected to what was going on, but there were people who could actually do something and impact what was going on. And that's something that not a lot of children get to grow up with.
Yeah, I'll note, and hopefully again not give away too much of the documentary, but there's a very nice still photograph that's put on the screen, I believe, from when your father lost his bid for the House of Representatives, and the picture is of you stroking.
Well, the other way around.
Your hair being stroked with
Yeah.
Your dad stroking your hair to comfort you, as though he was really more concerned about your emotions than his own.
Well, yeah, I remember that night vividly. That was his first political loss. He was supposed to win. He was ahead by probably 14 points in the last poll that was taken 2 weeks before the election. And it was a shock. I was in 8th grade, I believe. That photo appeared in the New Haven Register the next day. As a 57-year-old, I can look back at it and say how adorable, what a cute moment. As whatever I was, 12 or 13, as a 13-year-old, I was actually somewhat mortified to be captured in the newspaper, looking for so forlorn.
Forlorn.
But I've outgrown that. That was a tough night, a lot of memories. And we have that photo to encapsulate it.
Okay, Jonathan, back to you. Joe, if I can call him Joe, Senator Lieberman, his death was abrupt, sudden, and you had showed it to him 6 days, at least a certain amount of it to him 6 days prior. But his sudden death must have, beyond the sadness and the grief that would be obvious and expected at such a turn of events, it must have done something to kind of make you reorient the film, rethink it a little bit. Just what kind of adjustments did you feel you had to make going forward from the point when he sadly died?
Well, it was definitely a shock. We had to pivot a little bit, and sort of, the coda of him not being alive anymore. So that's certainly covered in the film. I've made films about people who are no longer alive when I start the film, and so I sort of have a sense of where it's going. This definitely was a unique situation. I did review all of the 7 hours of interviews that we did with him, and kind of placed a few new comments throughout. I think that became a little bit more poignant knowing that he was no longer with us.
The film, I mean, and feel free to disagree with me or take issue, but I don't see the film as a Jewish film in particular, but it does happen to be about an observant Jew, which Joe definitely was. The subject of Judaism or Orthodoxy, or he needed to take Shabbat off no matter what the political situation of the moment might be, things like that. And it just kind of it led me to think that Judaism, in a way, was the animating feature of his life, and thereby, in many ways, the documentary. And I just thought to myself, if he'd been a Presbyterian or other kind of Gentile, the substance might not have been there. Maybe I'm just a little, at least the religious substance wouldn't have been there. Just how do you see the sort of Judaism as carrying the storyline through the documentary?
The film is infused, with Joe's faith. But to your point, I agree that it's not a Jewish film. It's, I mean, really a tour of American history, of which Senator Lieberman was a really important part of, and yeah, animating is a good word. Is that his faith? I mean, the title of the film is Centered, and that's not just about his positions in life. It was his faith that centered him to, in my opinion, to make the moral stands that he did, and to not sort of quiver, I would say, whichever way the political winds would blow, which is, again, I think it's such a timely film because what we're seeing today is, um, lack of a better term, just a lot of capitulation and people not really sticking to what they've stood for years and decades. And all of a sudden, someone who is here is now over here. And then at the same time, you have people who are just staying in their corners and not working with the other side. So there's many lessons, I think, that Joe, being a man of faith, but having a moral center, is something that many people could hopefully be inspired by, because I don't want people to only think, well, this is look at how far we've fallen, but to think that, where can we go? And similar in the film, Matt talks about the lack of anti-Semitism that accompanied the 2000 campaign. That is not the case today. And I don't necessarily think we're going in one direction. I think it can be changed, and that our country is capable of tremendous tolerance and understanding for all manner of minorities in this country, including Jews.
In the film, I was I'm not giving it away, I don't think. But there's one of the people you interviewed, David Lightman, former correspondent for the Hartford Courant, who I think arguably was one of the journalists, if not the journalist, who knew Joe the best. And he said very forcefully that his faith guided Joe, because how else could you cope with the idea that one Supreme Court justice cost him the vice presidency? And I referred to the 2000 election, which I think, as most people know, was thrown into the court system and went up to the Supreme Court, and the 5-4 decision in December of 2000 by one vote went against the Gore-Lieberman ticket. So that does go to the faith guided him aspect of what you're saying. But when you look at it, a lot of the controversy surrounding Joe was not didn't really have anything to do with Judaism or being Jewish. I mean, it could have been anybody, I think, who was so kind of strident, stubborn, what have you, on Iraq, particularly after the 2003 invasion ordered by then President George W. Bush. It could have happened to any politician, but it happened to Joe Lieberman. I mean, are you saying that and also, the kind of "I did it my way," and I would interject here that certainly was a favorite song and was kind of a leitmotif for his political existence. But what is there anything kind of particularly Jewish in your minds, either of you, about the kind of trajectory of his life from I want to get something done, I'm a proud centrist, to essentially being very isolated to the sideline of the Democratic Party, and up to the point where he left the party and was an independent in his last years?
Well, I would say I think this was the case for my dad. Um, he was deeply infused with Jewishness, with his Judaism. Part of the Jewish heritage he grew up within a synagogue with a really wonderful, charismatic rabbi, Joe Ehrenkrantz, spoke powerfully each Shabbat, was the tradition of the prophetic voice. And I'm not saying at all that my dad saw himself as a prophet, but there is a tradition that we encounter most weeks at Shul, typically the Haftorahs, of speaking out in one way or another, oftentimes against what's happening. And I think that was in his in his DNA, in his religious DNA. The other thing I'd say is, although my dad would always say that the Stamford, Connecticut that he grew up in was really the prototypical, whether you want to call it melting pot or vegetable soup of America, where everyone was in there together and everyone got along. And yeah, you were Jewish or Italian or Black or Irish, and maybe you teased each other a little bit, but it functioned well. So he didn't grow up with anti-Semitism, but I think if you're Jewish, you're a member of a very small minority that has been discriminated against. Two, to the extent, like my dad, that you are observant, you are forging an identity for yourself every day, every meal that you eat, where you're gonna, as John McCain joked once, that if he had to eat another piece of salmon in his life, it would make he'd throw up, because going around with my dad, they were always eating salmon. But between eating kosher when other people are eating other stuff, between not going to big events that are on Shabbat, you're making very, very independent choices that are driven by how you value your religion. And I think that was absolutely part of his independence. You look at other notable acts of political courage, independence recently. Mitt Romney comes to mind as one of the only voices willing to stand up against Trump, another deeply religious person from another minority and historically persecuted religious minority. I think there's something about being a part of a group like that and living that life every day that steels you to act independently, to act in accordance with your conscience, and to perhaps not factor in or not be swayed as much by the typical political influences that affect other people.
Jonathan, you're okay with that? I don't want to cut you off.
Listen, I defer to Matt on most of these historical things. It's always fascinating, actually. I mean, Matt and I have been on tour a little bit together, and I'm always impressed with hearing new things, new stories. Thanks for keeping it fresh for me, Matt.
Okay. I agree. I'm certainly hearing a lot of new things, and after watching your documentary maybe 2-3 times, I thought I knew everything. But I'm just wondering, one thing that occurred to me in writing the review for a moment, which has just been posted today, and that was, it could be postulated that maybe it wasn't Joe that changed over time. Maybe it wasn't, he became more and more insistent on doing it his way, as the Frank Sinatra song goes. But that the world kind of shifted, the tectonic political plates underneath him shifted, so that the guy who arrived there in 1989, I just want to get something done. I want to be a centrist and compromise and get something done. By the time he's ready to leave office, that is no longer the case. That is no longer the recipe for success on Capitol Hill. It's stridency, kind of belittling and hating the other person. The way to raise money for your campaign is to downgrade the other person, your opponent, your political opponent, and that was a world that Joe Lieberman might have certainly did try to negotiate, but maybe without great success, because again, the earth had turned, and it was no longer the kind of comedy, comity comedy of 1989. What do you think of that? Either of you or both of you?
I'll take first crack. I mean, I think overwhelmingly he stayed true to who he was, his values really dating back to college and law school and being a Kennedy Democrat, and ideas of social justice, and being willing and being pro-growth here at home, and standing up for freedom, liberty, American values, not just here but around the world when practical. I think he was true to that all the way through. In the film, there are a couple of his former aides who suggest that perhaps he got a bit more conservative as the fissure with the Democratic Party became clear. I don't really think he did. I mean, he may have taken some stances publicly that he would not have. He might have sort of unnecessarily done things that he wouldn't have if he were still, quote unquote, a member in good standing of the Democratic caucus of the Senate, just because it would have been a headache. But once, I think it just became clear to him that, again, as he says in the movie, based on having the scarlet eye for Iraq, that one issue on his forehead, that essentially he was out as a Democrat. The Democrats defeated him in Connecticut in the Democratic primary in 2006, and he went on to win as an independent. But it's something else we talked about. What happens is once something like that happens, he'd get called to be on, for example, Fox or whatever network he'd get called to be interviewed on. They would also tend to focus on these issues that were sort of the wedge issues, the issues that have made him unpopular with Democrats. And so it just reinforces itself. He has this one position in variance with the Democratic caucus, and we'll just say Fox. Fox wants to talk to him about that issue or those two issues all the time. And so it mushrooms a little bit, this perception that that's all he is. In the meantime, his overall voting record remained very progressive, as indicated by how different interest groups score different members' votes. So I think he stayed true to who he was, and I think sort of the dynamic with the media kind of exaggerated the extent to which people might think that he had become some big conservative.
Yeah, I would agree that, I mean, just in looking at his positions, that he came into the Senate as a progressive on social issues, and he stayed true to that throughout his career. And he was probably more moderate on economic issues, and that was probably true throughout his whole career and his positions, and was, more to the right when it came to foreign policy. So I don't really see how he changed so much, but things around him changed. And in terms of the idea of compromise that you had said earlier, Dan, what struck me after a while was less about Joe's ability to compromise and more about his ability to be okay working with people outside of his party to get done what he wanted to get done, which is different. It's saying, this is what I believe, and I'm not going to be siloed and say, well, if John McCain believes, what I believe, then I can't work with him because he's a Republican. And what's, fascinating is that in the people may or may not know, but after running with Al Gore 8 years later, he was almost John McCain's vice presidential nominee. But that was because he was pro-choice and he couldn't be, and that wouldn't work for the Republican Party. But so they were that close that they were almost running mates. But then when it came to the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, they were on opposite sides. So you can't really pin down Joe Lieberman and say you're this, you're that. I think to Matt's point, it's just a very simplistic way of looking at one man, and that's not, what I want to show is someone who's a complex person, and that they're driven by something, but that they're not just one way. And the trajectory of what he did might have been just because he was feeling more strongly about certain things that maybe annoyed Democrats on one side. But then again, we showed this film to people who are on the left, and people who are just kind of annoyed. They feel betrayed by Joe Lieberman on some level. But then when you talk about, oh, he led the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, they're like, oh, it's just
Right.
like, how do they're having a hard time squaring that circle. And I think we're living in maybe technologically advanced times, but in some ways trying to make things very simple, and things are not simple. And Joe Lieberman was a complex person like all of us are, and we tried to convey his complexity in the film.
Yeah, and the not only was he considered for the vice presidency, the nomination for the vice presidential candidate by McCain in 2008, but Joe ended up endorsing McCain, which was, as far as Democrats were concerned, was like a grenade with the pin pulled. So it kind of politically, in terms of his allies, not his principles, as you're saying, his principles, I agree, were constant. But as far as Democrats were concerned, maybe some of those very liberals who you showed the film to, he was not one of them anymore. I really got kind of a kick out of a couple of scenes in the documentary where Joe Lieberman is sitting around with the guys from his distant, political past in the 80s, who, the chairman of the state party, the assistant to the mayor, the people who really knew him right at the start. And one of them actually says to him something to the effect of, well, you're a pain in the ass, or, you're always my friend. You're always going to be my friend, whatever anybody else says about you, even if you are a pain in the ass. So I thought that was good. And then he does at some point say that in a kind of interesting act of self-recognition or self-criticism, I realize it's not easy being my friend and political supporter. So I think that all is part of the complexity that you're talking about, Jonathan. Okay.
Yeah, we're missing nuance in the conversation, and I'm glad that's something that you got out of the film, and I hope viewers who see it will get that as well.
Yeah. Let's change the tune up a bit and talk about Hadassah. I was just trying to think, how can you describe this? The secret sauce or something, but she called him Joey. She was obviously very much in love, and Joe was very much in love with her. And this was more than just the kind of political marriage that we've seen. The famous ones are, of course, FDR and Eleanor. Bill and Hillary. I mean, maybe Abraham and Mary Todd, going back centuries. So just talk a bit about the impact of Hadassah, the sort of the Hadassah factor in his life. I mean, would he have ended up as he did, or would he have gone as far as he did if Hadassah wasn't there to urge Joey along?
Well, it's impossible to say. I think the biggest factor in how far he went was him, and he would have been him regardless. But there's no question that she was an enormously loving and supportive wife and partner, and not just in his political career, but just in his whole life. And I know having that kind of basis was a source of strength for him. as he went out, and he's as lovely as he was, it's a hard life. It's a very busy life. The schedule is both very busy and very unpredictable. It's not easy on a family. It's not easy on a spouse. Hadassah is not I forget the expression, but she's not a shy, receding personality. So, it wasn't like that. But she got it. She understood it. She understood the importance of his career to him. I think she felt the importance of it to herself as well, especially as she spoke often, continues to speak as the child of survivors. And she saw his success in the Senate and beyond, and her part in that is a way of raising a fist to Hitler, that not only have we survived, but that we've prospered and reached great positions of power. It was all very important to her, and he loved that as just as he loved her. So they were a wonderful team.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by she in the documentary. She comes off as, everything you say, Matt, but somewhat amazed, maybe even bewildered that a lot of this is happening to her, and in a good way. But I mean, at one point, I guess when he wins the Senate race in 1988, and there's the video of her, being interviewed recently, Jonathan, saying, I couldn't believe this is really happening, or this is really happening. So it's just she I guess half of her kind of didn't believe the vortex she was caught up in, but she didn't shy away, as you say, Matt, from it. Okay, well, we're getting kind of close to our Q&A part, and you had mentioned, Jonathan, showing it to various kind of left-wing type people, and they were surprised to hear that Joe did something as progressive as push forward on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But I've had this kind of discussion with others who knew that I was doing a review of this documentary, and they kind of, from that very kind of leftish type perspective, we're wondering, I mean, being independent is fine. Being, I did it my way, all of that, being a centrist, and seeking compromise. But what if the things that you're standing for are really things that are bad, or you oppose, or how can I admire? It's almost as if they're saying, how can I admire Joe Lieberman for his stand on Iraq in 2003, although he did later kind of regret it, or express regret for his lengthy support of it. How can I admire someone for that position when I detest that position and think it was really a disaster for the country? I don't know if you really have any reaction to that, but if such a person,
I'm here to tell Joe's story, and you can take it as you want. You can despise the man, you can love the man. He had positions that not everybody agreed with. I think that, to his credit, again, as compared to other public officials that we see, he took responsibility for it, and said, listen, sometimes I do things that that annoy people, but this is why I did it. Not, oh, they convinced me, or this and that. It's like, this is my feeling. And is anyone blameless in the world about things? Now, I did say, when he talked about, because I had strong opinions on that Iraq War of 2003 as well. And so when he said, and up until we had spoken, really, all I had seen in op-eds, even 20 years after the war, was this position of, well, we got rid of Saddam Hussein, and it was important to, because Saddam Hussein was a threat to the Middle East. That all could be true, but you can live with different things at the same time. So I asked him, what about the tragedy of what happened to the people of Iraq? the hundreds of thousands of people that died. And and it was a moment, and, in the room when we were talking, and I think he really, he heard me and he responded. I think that's one of the most powerful moments in the film, and, and owned for things that didn't go right. And, I don't see a lot of people taking blame or credit, for things that didn't go right these days. I think it's like it's your fault if it goes wrong. It's my fault if it goes right. And, so in terms of like liking the man, are we only going to watch film, to Matt's point? Are we only going to watch films about people that we like? Like, is this only like, oh, I can watch a Ruth Bader Ginsburg film and that can be totally hagiographic, but I can't watch a Joe Lieberman film because, it might mess with what I think of him. And this, if I'm giving people some cognitive dissonance about it, that's fine. But if it reinforces what they're thinking, I'd like to think that we told the story in its, as I said before, in its complexity and as much as possible in 77 minutes in its totality. And people will be able to see the film. It's coming out in Regal Theaters March 18th and March 19th. You can see in the chat, centeredfilm.com. You can see all the theaters that it's playing in. And, I would encourage people to see it for themselves and recognize that Joe Lieberman, even if you don't agree with all of his positions, even if you can't stand some of his positions, that he's really a role model in terms of public service in many ways.
Yeah, and I would just add that dynamic, Dan, that you're talking about, his defeat in the Democratic primary in Connecticut in 2006, really on the one issue of Iraq. He could be seen as like the canary in the coal mine for this kind of, you're either 100% with me or I don't want any part of you kind of politics that we have now. And, to use, again, to refer to the Jewish dietary laws, whether you're on the right or the left, there is a lot of sort of peer pressure pushing you to adapt a mindset of, I want my candidate, it's not enough to be kosher by, let's say, the lights of the conservative movement of Judaism, or maybe even it's not enough just ortho, you got to be glot kosher. You got to be glot kosher Democrat, or you got to be glot kosher Republican. And just like with food, if it's not 100% kosher, it's treif. And my dad, because he was not 100% kosher by the lights of some people, became treif. And that's a predominant dynamic in politics generally now.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting, Jonathan, that what you just said about, asking him the tough questions and getting to the point where he said, if I had known then, about the cost, about, the loss of life. And he didn't really say, that the weapons of mass destruction were never really discovered, that was kind of a bogus rationale, but obviously it undergirds it. You asked the tough questions. So therefore the documentary has a response in, or has responses in it that kind of go to the issues that this person I'm talking about was raising. So I guess you're to be congratulated for that. I sincerely mean that,
Well, thank you.
You asked the tough questions, which is why the documentary isn't just a love poem to Joe Lieberman.
Well, that's the job of a journalist, is to ask the hard questions. And I think having a camaraderie that I wound up developing with Senator Lieberman, I think he could have denied it. He could have said whatever he wanted. He didn't have to. He's, he's probably heard harder questions from people than me. But I think it was at a certain time in his life when he was willing to look at it reflectively. We spoke also about his opposition to the public option for Obamacare. And I think he spoke I asked him direct questions, about insurance companies in Connecticut, and was that the reason? And we addressed it. We just spoke, about these issues. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to him about the things that bothered me. And I told him in the very beginning, before we started, I said, I want to talk about these things that, um, that I have issue with, as a person, and looking at his how important his votes were to lots of different things. So it was a really unique experience, and I hope that people get to see it, and I hope they can put aside the, well, how you feel about Senator Lieberman, and recognize that there are um, many, many positive things that he brought to the body politic.
Right. Well, Mazel tov, guys. This has been quite a illuminating round here, and I think if Suzanne is ready, we're going to go to some Q&A. So again, thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. Question about his involvement with No Labels, the organization that was thinking about putting forward an independent candidate for this past election and ultimately decided not to. He was the founding chairman of that organization. What was his time like? Did he share with you what it was like be part of this organization that got a lot of people not being so positive about what they were trying to accomplish? And was he disappointed in the fact that they didn't feel that there was anybody out there who could run on a no labels platform?
I'll just say from my experience, and Matt, I'm sure you know much more about it, that he said that's covered in the film. I mean, that was a really big part of it for me as well, especially that when we were filming, No Labels was stirring things up. Ultimately, they didn't find a candidate. He felt that it was really important, and he addresses that as to why the current two-party system seems to not be functioning as effectively as it has in the past. And we spoke to others who felt the same way, other people who are connected with No Labels, current elected officials about it. I don't think at this point, I don't think it's that controversial to say that we could use some more options, in public office, not just the two-party system. So, but Matt, he was founding chairman since 2010. So, and they had tremendous success in the House, and there were some senators who also were part of No Labels, and that's sort of, but a tough place to be. It's, as we've been saying, it's like you're either here or you're there. It's like to be here is like, where really are you? But it feels like that's really where the majority of people are. No one's here all the time or here all the time.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he died shortly before they made the decision not to field a candidate, but he was involved in trying to scout out candidates and realized it was difficult. And I think he was frustrated by it, but he didn't get overly down. So much had happened in his political career. He never got overly down about things. And No Labels, for most of its history and now, is primarily focused on working with a group they call the problem solvers in the House and also the Senate, and really trying to bring back some element of governance from the center out, and sort of establishing a large enough group of members in each chamber who can be kind of like a critical fulcrum that can make the difference in key pieces of legislation. For example, they made a huge difference in passing the infrastructure bill under President Biden. It's covered well in the film. I think it was something he was proud to be a part of. I think this whole program has, in the title of this program we're doing today, has something about finding the political center. And it's an unusual situation that we're in, because I mean, these are rough approximations, but it's as though, you're on a football field, and we'll say you have 25% of the people in one end zone, 25% of the people in the other end zone. They're all jumping up and down, going crazy. And then you have, 50% in the middle, and the candidates are all talking to those 25% in the end zone, and the half of us, or maybe it's 40%, whatever it is, who are in the middle. The rest of we're just like, why isn't anybody talking to us? And that is a breakdown in our politics, and it's something that a third party presidential ticket could address.
Jonathan, is there any plans to maybe go on a college tour? That seems to be a place where those that are in college right now, they have no memory of people working across the aisle. They have no role models to see that. And so, is there a way to get students to see this film and understand how important working with others is in this day?
Yes, definitely. I mean, there's a curriculum that's being developed that will hopefully go along with that. So it's not just watching a film. It's a whole sort of rigorous um, world of this is what you can do. Because it's not just about watching a film and saying, "Hey, look up there, look at this person." It's about, well, Joe's not with us anymore, and we've still got to move on. So what can people do and young people to kind of bring about this more centered, tolerant, less extreme version of how do we talk to each other? How do we listen to each other? How do we find the common ground and then still disagree, but not think someone is your mortal enemy because you disagree with them on positions.
Thank you. How was he as a grandfather? I know he has several grandchildren. What was he like with your kids growing up?
He was a wonderful Poppy. That was his name, Poppy. So I was the oldest grandchild, so I got to name his dad Pop. And then my daughter was the oldest grandchild of this generation, and she got to name my dad Poppy. And he was for the first 5 or so years of my kids' lives. We lived in New Haven, and so saw them a lot. He was a very big part of their lives. We then ended up in Atlanta for a long time and saw them less frequently, but always uh, just a warm, cuddly, friendly, supportive presence. That just it's like he is with anyone, but it's especially nice if you're a grandkid. He made you feel good. And they used to like his big ears and his jowls and stuff like that, and so all very fun. He was a wonderful Poppy.
And what was he working on at the time of his untimely passing?
Well, he had also just finished a book about how our shared faith uh, can give us the answers to how to fix our politics. And the book's available on Amazon. It has a long title. I don't remember it all, but it's something like Faith and how faith can help us fix our broken politics. And so it's remarkable. And he really just finished that, a few weeks before he died. Um, it's just all the same kind of things. I don't think anything, no sort of radical, new or surprising thing, um, but all the same sorts of issues. He'd be very disappointed with this administration's backing away from Europe and specifically Ukraine. Again, consistent with his politics from the very beginning of his career in the early 1960s. He was a big believer in our alliance and in NATO, and the strength that it brought us. And I know he'd be speaking out respectfully but forcefully against this new isolationist attitude.
Mm-hmm. Real quickly, someone wanted to know if he had a favorite Hebrew Bible prophet. Did he ever mention that when maybe at Shabbat?
I can't say. I can't. I couldn't say he had one favorite. No.
Okay. And lastly, Jonathan, as we wrap up, you mentioned how you had 6 or 7 hours worth of interviews and your film could only be so long. Is there something that you interviewed him about that you just wish that you could have included, but it just didn't fit within this film that you were making?
Yeah, there's about 29 hours or whatever, from all the people that we spoke. There were so many things that we wish we could have included. Two of the really important parts of Joe's Senate career, which we didn't put in. One was his opposition to violence in video games, which was during his first term. And that was something that he was very proud of, that the video game industry voluntarily decided to put in some sort of a code. And, I don't think this shouldn't be so controversial, that they, that I guess it was a combination of his morality, but just, I mean, this violent video games are too violent, and I don't know where we are today with them. I don't play these games, but that was one of the things that he had talked about, and was a big part of his first term. The other was the Balkan War, and his, just to Matt, what you were saying about our alliances, that that he and others in the Democratic community, I think it might have been bipartisan, but had encouraged and really pushed President Clinton to go in at what was called at the first time the first moral war. There was nothing. It wasn't like real politic that the US was going to get anything out of it aside from stopping, those awful massacres that were happening in the former Yugoslavia. And so those are two things that that's the film is really just a starter, like a conversation starter. And if people want to know more, there's so much more to Senator Lieberman that I would encourage people to look into.
Matthew, any final thoughts on your dad?
He was a great guy. I miss him. He is worth a look if anyone watching is interested in how politics has changed over the last 40 years or so. Just a wonderful guy and a great legacy, and the movie is a great part of that legacy, that and a user-friendly part of it. So we're very happy about it.
Great. Well, Matthew, thank you. Jonathan, thank you. And Dan, thank you. We really appreciate you joining us today. Again, the movie is called Senator Joe Lieberman. As Jonathan said, it'll be in Regal Movie Theaters March 18th and 19th. So please go onto the website and find a place near you to watch it. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Go to momentmag.com to sign up for our upcoming programs, and we will see everybody next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.